Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Celeste, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you for the invitation. So glad to be here.
I know we're going to have such an interesting conversation today. Before we get to your latest book and everything that you're up to, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oh, the first job that I had, I used to be a reporter out of undergraduate I went to the undergraduate at University of Kentucky. And so I was down in Lexington, Kentucky. And you being from Tennessee, you probably don't like that, but but and I was a reporter. So my first career, I was a reporter, and so I worked at the local radio station there, and very, very interesting. Um, I was actually surprised that I got a job there because, I was just starting out of college, and the owner of the station, I was working in the University of Kentucky Sports Information Office while I was in school that my senior year. And the owner of the station, largest radio station in the state, was there. I guess he was going to see the athletic director or something, and he came to see me, and he said, "Hi, you're Celeste, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Well," he introduced himself and said, "Why don't you come down to the radio station for an interview? I think you would be good for an open reporter job that we have open." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, great." So I went in, interviewed, got the job, and oh, probably about several months in, um, I started finding out that the one of the men in the station was well, at the time they just called it, well, just giving extra attention to women back then in those days.
Mhm.
But now it was actual sexual harassment is basically what it was. And a young lady who was a receptionist at the station, she became he started paying her attention, and she happened to lose her wallet one day, and she didn't know where she had placed it, and she was just frantic. And she came up to me in the lunchroom and she said, "Celeste," she goes, um, "this person told me they found my wallet." And I was so relieved and so happy. And the receptionist, she was a sweet, sweet girl, really sweet, but kind of naive. And so I said, "Oh, okay." I said, did he give it to you?" And she said, "Well, he said he wanted me to pick it up at his place tonight."
Mhm.
And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm going to come with you." And so um, um, the day ended. We left and went to his place, and she walked up there first. And he was like, "Oh, well, why don't you come in?" And I then stepped out so he couldn't see me at first, and I stepped out from behind the door, and I was like, "We don't need to step in. You just need to give her her wallet." And he was all surprised and everything, and then he admitted he didn't have it, and he thought he had it, but he didn't have it. Made up all of these excuses. And so I just grabbed her hand and we just walked home. But the things that women experienced, and back then especially, and we're talking like the 80s now. um it was, it was just, it was amazing. It was just
Mhm.
truly amazing. And if she had gone there by herself, who knew what would have happened? This young lady just on her own with this person. And
Mhm.
so that was an experience that I'll never forget, because it happened to me like within a year of graduating from undergraduate. I don't know how I became so tough. I think athletics made me tough, but and my parents. But it was just clearly, my mother always said I had the spirit of discernment. And I
Mhm.
could just tell, it's just something was wrong there. And I was glad that I had the opportunity to help her. But women in the workplace, that type of conflict, um, it's just it was such a horrible, horrible thing, and still is to this day a horrible, horrible thing that has to be addressed.
Thank you for sharing that story. There's a lot I want to talk about there, but let's continue the story a little bit. Did you report him? Did he continue to get away with this behavior? Were there any repercussions?
There were none, no repercussions. And I didn't report him because they knew the type of an individual that he was, and
Mhm.
nothing had been done. And and so he never did anything to me at
Mhm.
all, ever. Um, and so I guess he kind of knew how I was. But I after I left, because I left and went to grad school a couple years after that, almost a couple years. And after I left and went to grad school, I came back to visit some friends to Lexington, and I found out that he had been fired.
Mhm.
So um, someone who he picked the wrong person, I think.
Eventually, he got that he preyed on the
Yeah,
wrong person
yeah.
who
But
actually.
I feel, I was a young person. I didn't think anybody, and then plus two, because it didn't happen to me, she didn't want to report it.
Mhm.
And as much as I encouraged her, but she just said, I want to forget about it. And that, maybe if she had, maybe they would have listened to her and brought it with a bunch of other different complaints. But I was just glad to hear that he had been, let go finally.
Yeah, the bystander is a really interesting position to be in because we are told, maybe not in the 80s, but certainly today, if you see something, say something. You
Yes,
can
yes.
partner, you can be an ally. And yet there persists this at work and other places. Look the other way. This did not happen to you. This is not your business. This is not
Mm-hmm,
affecting you, which
mm-hmm.
is ridiculous because it is affecting us. And we are supposed to speak up. And yet there's this real mixed signal like you are meddling or you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it's so very sad, but if you think about, like, there's an incident that happens, there's the person that it happens to, and like you said, there's the bystander, and then there's the aggressor, or the person who did it. I won't call it an aggressor, but the person who did the act, the person who was a recipient of the act, and then the bystander who's who's looking. And when you're sitting there as the bystander and you're looking at this that's happening, all of these questions are going through your mind like a decision tree. Um, should I intervene? Should I not intervene? If I intervene, will I make the person who this is happening to feel uncomfortable? How do they feel? Do they want me to intervene? So there's all of the, and then there's all the person who is the uh, doing the act. Are they in a position of power? Is there ramifications that are going to happen to me and the person who is the subject of the behavior? So all of these things are going through your mind as a bystander. And unfortunately, some people just say, you know what, I I don't want to get involved. I just, if this is work, it's not. I just don't want to get involved. I don't want my day or my life at work to be such that just a bad experience. But the way that I look at it is, and how I've sometimes addressed it. Let's say it's something like, we're in a meeting and the person is embarrassed because they spoke up on an issue, and the person got embarrassed because this person just sort of belittled them and marginalized them, and almost made fun of them, and saying their idea was nothing and it was a stupid idea and all of this stuff. You probably have seen it too. And so you're sitting there and there's other people in this meeting who are watching this behavior.
Mhm.
And and I would usually, what I would do is, if I would say, well, I'm kind of interested in her idea. Mary, could you just elaborate a little bit, or something like that? Or in the cases that I've sat in on, it's the boss that's doing it, and we're
Mhm.
all peers. And so what I would usually do in that situation is, during the break of the meeting or the discussion, I would go to that person and really just check on them, say, are you okay? I saw what happened at the meeting. You know, is there anything that I can do? Because I want to check with them first about should I do anything? Because I don't want to make it worse for them or whatever. So I do check with them and say, are you okay? And is there anything that I can do? And then, in this particular situation, the person was, no, I can handle it. I'll be okay. It was this was the type of boss who it seemed like at every meeting there was a different person who was in his crosshairs.
Right.
And so, they just said, I was the person who happened to be, it was my turn to be in the crosshairs. But, you do go through that, but we have to, as bystanders, we have to check in, see if the person's okay, see if if they need some encouragement, if whatever it is that they need. And sometimes they just need to vent, and they need to say what's on their mind. But having that conversation, that dialogue, I think is really, really important to help encourage them, to let them know that you're there, to let them know that you want to help. And, it's really hard when it's the boss and you're all peers and you're all afraid to go to the boss and say something. But after oh gosh, a few months of this, then, a few of us did have a meeting with the boss and say, look, this is the behavior. This is how you're making us feel. This is how it comes across. And, trying to give the guy a benefit of the doubt that he was not aware of how he was making us feel. Now that made it hard to believe, but we tried to go in assuming good intent, and having a conversation and not stooping down to that level. Because what I always tell people is you want to make sure that you're treating the other person with dignity and respect, because you want to be treated with dignity and respect, but also you don't want to lower your standards and let someone take away your own dignity and respect that you have for yourself. And so I always remember that. But we had a meeting with the person, and the behavior curtailed a bit for a few months, but then it started rising back up again in times of stress. When there's a demand on the output, there's a lot of pressure, revenues are down, whatever the pressure may be. And in those times of stress, you see people behaving in a way that is not necessarily conducive of really good inclusive leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pick up a couple of things that you said. One, of course, it's really strong when we are the bystander, we don't know what to do, and we think about all these different sorts of options. The
Yeah.
first one, of course, is going to the person and asking them what they want. It's like with conflict, I am imagining that somebody else has the same values, the same beliefs, the same desires that I do, and therefore I'm confused why they're behaving this way. But we see things differently. And so how I might want, maybe I want you to stand up for me at a meeting, or maybe I don't. Uh, but that has nothing to do with what you want. And so the first thing is just to ask that other person, right? What do you want? And if they say nothing, leave me alone, or, oh, I'm so glad you asked, you have acted. But as you were talking, I was also thinking about when we tell bystanders, people who, especially let's say we're all in a team together, but the thing is not directly affecting me. It is affecting me because this is my work environment. And so, of course, it depends on who you are and what the circumstances and who's saying and what the power dynamics are. But one thing that could do is, advocate for yourself by saying, hey, this meeting dynamic is not working for me, or I feel uncomfortable. Do you want feedback, boss? Because what I'm seeing here is that you don't want feedback. Is that true, or do you actually want it? Right. And
Mm.
so empowering the individual, it doesn't matter if the direct thing happened to you or not. This is your place of work. What do you want to feel like? And if you don't stand up for what you want, you're going to get the opposite, and it's going to get worse. Things don't get better usually unless somebody intervenes, because I bet your boss did not know. Most people don't know.
Mm.
Very few people are just rotten. I mean, I don't think anybody's actually rotten, but very few people are even,
Assuming bad intent,
that's
right?
right, right. It's a learned behavior, a learned pattern. They think by being aggressive, this is how we motivate, and very demotivating, but maybe
Hmm.
that's what was modeled to them. So a lot of people don't know how they're coming across, and they're not going to know unless they're told. Now, who is in the position to tell them? Again, it's with conflict and all these, it's very particular and
Yeah.
specific to the environment, the person, your personality, what it is that you want, what, of course, if something is really dire happening, when you intervene, someone's being physically, threatened or harmed or something like that. But
Yeah, and those you're absolutely right. And it, it- I like the way that you phrased it too about this is how it's making me feel because you know, decades in human resources and coaching and counseling leaders and managers and executives, it's about how how you are, what type of culture you're creating with that team.
mhm,
And you're exactly right. You may think it's just a, well, that person just doesn't like me, or that person just is not carrying their weight. And I have to get on them. I have to do this. I have to do that. And it's like, but you're creating an environment with your team where they're seeing how you respond to something that you don't like
mhm,
and what that looks like. And so you have the control and the power to create and cultivate the environment and the culture that you want within that team. And your behavior, they say the shadow of the leader casts a long, long either darkness or whatever behavior that you want to do. But it starts with the leader, unfortunately, in some cases. And you have to have that conversation. I love that. This is how it's making me feel.
right. Instead of you've done this, this is my experience. And
Yeah, yeah.
someone can say, no, it's not, but that would be a really bizarre thing to
Yeah,
say.
yes. Very bad thing to say.
I was just watching this show, and it's a popular show out right now. And somebody it was a sports show, and somebody had done something, picked a fight on the ice, and was back in the locker room and was expecting to be berated by the coach. And the player says, "Why aren't you yelling at me?" And the coach said, "Because I want you to listen." And I just thought that was really strong. So this person was used to being yelled at.
Mm,
Um, and so what is the leader? What is the leader doing? And so this idea that if I don't get on them, if I don't micromanage them, if I don't scare them, then they won't perform. But it's a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. And it's
mhm.
playing the short game. If we want to play the long game, it's as you said, it's culture. What am I building? And not being short-sighted.
That's exactly right. I can remember there was an incident where um, employees had gathered it was off hours, and they were having a sort of a celebration for one of the employees, and I think they were retiring or something. And so they had this sort of gathering in the break room, and it was, like I said, it was after hours, but still it's in the work property. And the manager of that group, there was about maybe 20 people, 25 people. The manager of that group was there as well, said a few words, and then as the night went on, um, words started to flow, jokes started to
Mhm.
happen, and inappropriate jokes and behaviors and things like that. And so it came back that this happened to the leader of that group. Um, and so the leader was saying, "Well, I can't believe, that manager was in the room. Why didn't they do something?" And I wasn't surprised that they didn't do something because I knew the individual, I knew the manager, I knew they were kind of um, not the type of person who would intervene. That just wasn't their style. They were more of a it's not laid back, but just a fear of conflict.
Mhm.
And so they didn't do anything. And it was a couple of people who just didn't like the tone and what was happening as the celebration went on, and they reported it
Mhm.
and said that they were uncomfortable. If this is the way that people feel in this department, then I don't know if this is the right environment for me and everything. And it was just and everything kind of fell to like this manager, and the leader said, I just can't believe it. The manager was there. Why didn't he shut it down?
Mhm.
And I said, that's a question that you need to have ask him and have that conversation with him. Why didn't he shut it down? Because that was his responsibility. And his whole thing was, well, it was
Yeah.
after hours and this and that and blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, you saw that many of the people in the room were starting to feel uncomfortable. And so you could either say, we need to shut this down, or hey, we're still in the workplace, or just to say something. You don't have to pound your fist on the table, but
Mhm.
you should have shut it down. And it's that type of a situation where you hate that it had to get escalated because it could have been handled, in the room. The conflict could have been handled in the room. And, the manager would have handled the situation, and then the people in the team would have probably respected him a lot more than they did that next day,
Yeah, I
unfortunately.
mean, that's such a unfortunate scenario. It's a great, very it's a great scenario to think about because it brings up a variety of things like expectations. It's
Hmm.
after hours, who's in charge? Well,
Yeah.
if you're at work, if it's a work event, if you're out bonding at a baseball game, you are celebrating something after hours, but it's still work, then it is still work. So
Yeah.
we're all still responsible. I mean, we would hope off color jokes or whatever don't happen at all because why are we doing that? Okay, but
Yeah.
if that does start to happen or someone does start drinking too much and they're dancing on a table or acting inappropriately or something like that, a good question is always to ask ahead of time. It's like a designated driver. Who's doing that? Right? You
Hmm.
don't just assume the person who did it, we don't assume who is it, articulating expectations and then who is really paying attention. And
Yeah.
so if I went in with that expectation and then I see something happening and I feel uncomfortable, but at least I know it's up to me,
Yeah.
right? But if I don't even think about it, and then also I imagine, people who are conflict averse, I'm recovering in that category myself. I think, well, I don't want to offend these people because I bet they don't mean it badly. I bet they don't. But then me not trying to offend the people who are offending, a couple of
Hmm.
people, are now offending all these other people, right? So we just don't see, as you said, that manager could have gained so much goodwill and really been able to show probably who they are. They weren't liking what was going on, but the kind of trust that would have been built by someone who
Hmm.
will stand up when it's personally difficult, will stand up for them, will stand up for, we're not doing that here. That's just not what
Yeah.
we're about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and risk the other people being offended by like, well, that's not what I meant. Well, okay, good.
Yeah.
And yet,
That's exactly it. And you don't have to apologize for doing that either.
mm,
Because that's something that is, as you said, it's needed to happen. What's also interesting is the peer-to-peer conflict.
mhm,
You're in a meeting and someone's talking over you, a colleague is talking over you, or they're belittling you, or something like that. And when it's peer-to-peer, a lot of people, well, what should I do? How should I handle it? Especially um, if they're opposite genders, opposite generations, opposite, different races, just you name it. And so that dynamic comes in too. It's like, are they disrespecting me because I'm a woman? Are they disrespecting me because I'm a person who's disabled? Are they disrespecting me, because I'm in the LGBTQ plus community? That second dimension comes in because you're thinking, okay, why did they just do that? And then is it because of how I identify? That's the next layer that sort of comes in there. That you just can't help it. It just does. And so um in a lot of those cases, and those happen pretty frequently, probably even as much or more than the boss employee relationship,
mhm.
because the peer to peer, it just seems like people feel like that, well, they're a peer, they're not my boss, they can't tell me what to do. And what we're seeing more and more and more, especially with when Generation Y came in the workforce, Generation Z in the workforce, mental health and mental well-being is so critically important. and having and being in a work environment where people feel valued, a sense of belonging, don't feel like they have to hide who they are or cover who they are. And so that conflict that happens peer to peer, um, it can sometimes sort of throw you off balance a little bit because it's like, okay, why would they do that? We're peers. Why are they acting that way? But in those particular cases, that's when you can have the conversation, direct conversation with them, and you should have the direct conversation with them and explaining that, this was said, this is how it impacted me, this is how I felt. Let's have a conversation and sort of clear the air, whatever that needs to be said, whether you do it publicly or privately. um depending on how egregious it is, but dealing with it is it's the right thing to do. Again, you don't have to deal with it in a pounding your fist on the table way, but dealing with it for your own mental well-being is so critically important. And then also too, you might be helping someone who that person did it to yesterday or the day before, unbeknownst to you, and they just didn't feel empowered to be able to have that conversation and that dialogue with them. So I think that's really, really important. And this is something that, guys, since high school, middle school, school days, that conflict has happened and been happening, and it just continues up through your adulthood, unfortunately. But you have to address it. You really, really do, because I'll never forget when I was young, I was starting out, and I just got promoted to a manager, and I was a training manager in the manufacturing site, and I had a training supervisor who reported to me. It was on the third shift and just was not working at all. Everyone knew he wasn't working, and I was getting all riled up. I would come into work and I'd hear these stories and this and that, and I was in my gosh, probably late 20s at the time. And people were telling me what was happening, and I was getting all riled up and angry, and I can't believe that they're doing this and this was supposed to have been done and this and that, blah blah blah. And I happened to be talking to my mentor at the time, and I was telling him that all this was going on, and he's not working, he's not doing this, and it's causing a problem on the shift, and people aren't getting trained appropriately, and this and that, da 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 da. And he said, okay, well, have you had a conversation with them? And I said, well, I brought it up a couple months ago in a regular one-on-one meeting that we had, and it wasn't as bad as it had grown to. And he said something to me that I will never ever forget. He said, "Are you losing sleep over it?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you read my mind." I'm like, "I'm not sleeping. It's just I'm thinking about it all the time. It's just." And he said, "You know what? Do you think he's sleeping?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, do you think that he's sleeping well?" And I said, "Because I guarantee you he is, because he's getting away with this behavior." And he said, "So how does that sound? You're losing sleep, but he's not." And when he said it to me like that, I was like, "Oh my God." It totally, like, he said, "You allowed him to put the monkey on your back. Now you need to deal with it." And I tell you, I never forgot that conversation. And that was many, many moons ago. But it was one of the best advice that I had as far as becoming a new manager, a new director, and having to have to deal with conflict and from a performance standpoint with someone who was way older than me too. And so there was that whole generational thing that was going on. And after he said that to me, he was like, "Are you sleeping?" "Well, I guarantee you he's sleeping." I was like,
I love
what?
that.
He probably is sleeping. And here I am fretting over. So that next day, I came in late, came in on the third shift and had a meeting with him. And, you know, I didn't yell at him or anything like that, but just basically had a performance discussion with him. And after that, I tell you, I went home and I slept like a baby.
I love how you started that with you're a new manager, director,
Yeah.
and you have a mentor, right? How important it
Hmm.
is to talk to somebody who's experienced, somebody who can ask you those kinds of curious questions, get you to reflect. And my experience with conflict, somebody will come to me. So I'm in ombuds at a local university, and somebody will come to me and they'll talk to me about a conflict. And um, many times, and they're just sure the narrative on the other side. And then sometimes the other person will come to me, or it turns out the other person doesn't know there's a problem. Right. So this one person is like wringing their hands. They're very upset. It is really a big problem for them. They are losing sleep. That's physically and emotionally impacting them. The other person's happy as a clam because they don't know. Right. And that is the message, I think, with being a professional, being empowered to, oh, this is my problem. My mistake is thinking you're the problem. But
Hmm.
really, your behavior, I'm taking your behavior in a certain kind of way.
Yes.
Therefore, the good news is I can do something about that, right? I can choose to have a conversation with you. I can choose to look for another job. I can choose to think about why is this happening? And usually when I see a manager or somebody not performing, I'm not really upset at them. I'm upset with the person who's supposed to be watching them. That's where to me, that's where the ball has been dropped. Why are they not managing that person? Why are they not seeing where are they? Right? Again, things rise and fall with the leaders. Why are they allowing this behavior to continue? Why do they not notice this person isn't doing what they're supposed to, and therefore everybody else is suffering? Um, but it's all a message of empowerment. So
Yeah.
and our bodies give us these really good cues as to what's going on. Oh, something is bothering me. That means I can do something about it. I get to decide how to think about it. I get to decide how to act. I get to decide whether or not it's worth it, whatever it is that I'm feeling, or sometimes it is. Sometimes you've got to go through some really hard things. Back
Mhm.
to, I wanted to talk a little bit, and I want to hear your thoughts about resilience. And so we have the younger generations at work, I think, doing a really good job of talking about mental health and taking that very seriously. And yet, there is not just with the younger generation, I think everybody, a problem with some resilience, like being able to not only speak up for themselves, but then run away, right? Like now hold the conversation, hold space to actually hear what's going on, to move forward.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about what you see with resilience and maybe how to develop that?
Well, you're absolutely right. Organizations that have employees, leaders, managers that are resilient are organizations that seem to be more agile. They respond better to market demands, economic demands, downfalls, different things like that. They respond better because the people respond better. And resilient, I've got where I was reading somewhere that of all of the traits that, employees and professionals would need to have, resilience in an organization is one that is very, very important. And I think there are, as you, from a generational standpoint, the more time that you spend in the workforce, their resilience is sort of built up. Everybody jokes about Generation X and how they're just kind of like the generation that was dropped into the deep end of the pool when they were little, and they had to fend on their own. Don't worry about me, just I'll figure it out. All of that, and they say that that's real resilience. But I think that's, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't. I think there's different ways that you can define and think about resilience, and resilience isn't something that you, when something challenging happens, you just ignore it and sort of rifle your way through. I think resilience is, let's let's observe, assess the situation, let's have a conversation, a dialogue about it with different perspectives. And then, then after we've had that dialogue, we can agree to disagree, respectfully agree to disagree with each other. But sometimes in the workplace, because you have an output, you have a work product, you got to come to some type of agreement so you can get that work product out the door. And that's where you have to have the conversation and dialogue. And resilience is really, really important, because if you can't articulate how you're feeling, if you can't articulate something that might be going wrong, how something is having an impact on you, how it's having an impact on the work that is being done, the work product, the output, then that's problematic. That's very, very problematic. Another aspect of it is when, you can have a really strong strategy in implementation plan, process, etc. But we all know that life happens and different things happen in the course of that plan. And so you have to sort of say, okay, you get these bumps in the road. You don't want them to become tsunamis. You want them to just be ripples in the pond. And so a lot of that, the difference between a ripple in a pond and a tsunami reaction depends on the resilience of your employees. And I think that's very, very important for leaders to understand. And leaders and managers have a big role to play in helping to build resilience of the professionals and the employees within their regular or their organizations.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I was thinking, the ripple versus the tsunami is, back to, if I know something is wrong, but I don't know how to articulate it, then we're not going to be able to fix it because I can't use the right words. I'm not going to be able to have conversations. And so being
Or
able to,
fearful of the blowback that might happen
right,
to me, right? The kill the
absolutely.
messenger thing.
Oh, 100%. That's why people don't speak up, right? If
Yeah,
I'm the
yeah.
only one speaking up, then I'm going to take all the heat. I'm going to be villainized or whatever it might be, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if we want this psychological safety, right, the belief that I
Yeah.
can speak up without fear of retribution, then, right, this resilience, I think also we can help people with expecting failure, right? Like you should expect, first of all, not to get everything that you want. You should expect for things to go wrong. You should expect for your good intentions to sometimes fall apart. Like this is the normal thing that happens. We don't get A's and trophies all the way through. That's unrealistic expectations. And so we want everyone to succeed, but a part of succeeding is, again, looking at what is really the road of success. It is zigzaggy. So how do we minimize mistakes? How do we come along people? Because if we are afraid of the blowback, then people aren't going to speak up. And then
Nope.
it gets worse. And then we can't say, oh, yeah, we noticed this 6 months ago, but nobody wanted to say anything. So now we've just compounded the problems. And now 6 months, 2 years later, it's so much harder to unravel the damage that has been done. So with resilience, right? Resilience is not, it's meeting the difficulty but not breaking, right? But we should expect difficulty, expect disagreement. And so I think the leader could do something to set up a system so that we know how to disagree well with one another and that we experience, thank you for that idea, but we're not going to do it for these reasons, right? Adults want to know what's going on. Let's treat people like adults. Let's not pander, but we can still do it respectfully and thoughtfully to invite the person back to the table, right? We want to keep on sending the message. We want you here. We want what you have to say. And even if, in prizing ideas that we don't go with, because your idea, if you put forward an idea, Celeste, on something I'm doing, and I decide not to go with it, or the team decides not to go with it, that has helped me really think about why, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
are a valued member. You had this great idea, but I'm going to articulate, well, why I don't think it's going to work right now. If I think that, then it's going to even give me better idea of why this is the path we want to take.
Mm-hmm. In a lot of those discussions, so two things. The example that you said earlier about, well, I knew that was going to happen 6 months ago, and the leader getting so angry and mad and manager, whatever. And instead of asking themselves, how did I create an environment where 6 months ago they didn't feel comfortable coming and telling me that there was something wrong?
Mhm.
So you start there. What am I
Mhm.
doing wrong? what do I need to do? And, having that conversation, having that dialogue, creating that psychological safety. And another thing, when you said about, well, you come with an idea and it's like, okay, well, you hate saying that's not going to work, but just say, well, let's explore that. And one of the things that I think is really helpful is usually the manager, the supervisor, the leader has more information
Mm-hmm.
about what's happening from an organizational standpoint than their employees, usually. And maybe something is happening down the road, or something, in the company-wide strategy is going to be happening, and it's not the right time for that individual for us to implement their idea. Now, and sometimes they're not allowed to talk about what's
Yeah.
happening down the pike, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a situation where you have information, it's not confidential or whatever, and the employee doesn't know. A lot of times, what's good is, instead of you just telling, you're engaged in a conversation to say, okay, well, we just got information. So this is happening, on this level. How do you think your idea would work in that condition?
Mm-hmm.
So you're sharing information, but also engaging in a conversation and a dialogue, getting them to think about their idea, not in the myopic way that they've been thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
but in the context of what's happening more broadly.
Yeah.
And when you're able to do that, it doesn't come across as, well, you just didn't like my idea. And so
Mm-hmm.
you just sort of poo-pooed it. It comes across as, oh, wow, I didn't have that information. I get it now. I
Mm-hmm.
understand. And you've entrusted them to give them the information. You've also broadened their horizons a bit, so they understand more about what's happening within the organization. And it gets them, who knows, they go back and they sort of think about that idea, and then think about it in the context of what's happening, and come back to you with an even better one that you can implement.
Yeah.
So I think that's always a good idea.
I love that, inviting people in. And somebody can feel shame when they're shot down, right? Like
Yeah.
even if someone doesn't say that's a stupid idea, but the way that it comes across. And yet as the manager should think, okay, well, if somebody has a limited, we make decisions based on the information that's available to us, right?
Right.
And the higher up you go, the different kind of view that you have, the different sorts of balls in the air. But if have this myopic and that's what I've been tasked to do, then it makes sense.
Mhm.
I'm making decisions based on this, right? And so one thing that colleagues crave is information, because I want to be thinking about and planning given real world scenarios, what's really going on. And so as much as can be shared as possible, should be shared, right? We don't want to hoard information. We want people to be able to be creative and innovative in the right way, and we can only do that if we really know what's going on at the right time. But I love what you said about inviting somebody in, because the more minds we have at work, and the minds that are closer to doing the actual thing, right?
Yes.
They're going to be able to see what's going on and be creative in a certain kind of way, because they're doing the real world application. And then that can, instead of things just going from the top down, we love it when things from the bottom up go up, because those are more likely to be implemented, more buy-in, and more likely, many times likely to get at maybe it's a customer experience we want, or an employee experience, if it's coming from people who are actually more boots on the ground.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just a win-win situation in that particular case.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if they feel that you kind of shut them down, they won't bring anything else up again. And then it
Yeah.
will become a tsunami, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so building this resilience, I think, if you're a manager, well, anybody, doesn't matter if you're a manager or not, but really thinking about that. So if you are shut down, what do you want to do next? Are you going to let that person dictate how you show up professionally? Or if you are a manager, how can you help, given what we know about human nature and this person particularly, how can you help them develop and grow? which is good for them, it's good for your team, good for the organization and our
Mhm.
communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Celeste, this time, goodness, is really getting away from us, and I want to hear
Okay.
about your latest book, The Truth About Equity. Can you tell us about your book and what's in it?
Yeah. So the truth about equity, what it really is, what it isn't, and why everyone wins when we get it right. I wrote it, it was released last year, and it was a labor of love because I was starting to see that all of the work that had been done, um, there needed to be clarification and understanding of what it truly was in the context of understanding fair and equitable practices within the workplace and also in other aspects of institutions and society as well. And so I really focus on explaining what it is. And then also, I talk about the myths that exist. And it's not giving preferential treatment of one group over another. That's not what it's about. It's about giving people, everyone, regardless of how they identify, equal access to opportunities. That's what the key is, fair and equitable access to opportunities. And so I do some illustrations and analogies in the book, talk about that. And then lastly, I talk about how everyone does win when we can do the acts of equity, which I call near or midterm strategies, um, do the harder work of looking at institutional challenges and problems that exist. That's the longer term strategic work that needs to be done to create more inclusive environments. And then also engaging in those dialogues, engaging in those conversations where you might be walking into some conflict because people have different belief systems and values and perspectives, but you have to engage in the conversation because you don't want to leave people behind. And so I talk about how everyone will win if we get it right, if we do all of those things. Put the short term and midterm strategies together, the acts of equity, do the longer term strategic work of pulling out bias in systems that are that and institutions, et cetera, and then engaging in collective dialogue and getting people to a collective purpose. So
Mhm.
that's what the book is about, and I'm really really happy that it's come out during such times that we're facing right now, and I hope that people can understand that it isn't an ugly word. It isn't something that they need to be afraid of. It's something that we need to all embrace and understand it.
I love that because I think one thing that can help is when we think about the opposite. So
Mhm.
if we're not equitable, what are we, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and when we think about fairness, right? Fairness really becomes crystal clear to us when we feel like we're being treated unfairly.
Hmm.
When we see how we are negatively impacted. And so when we think about um, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So if I want a happy environment, a good, strong, healthy work environment, that
Hmm.
means that's not only strong and healthy for me, but everybody else. Because if
Yeah.
everybody else feels this belonging, feels like they're being treated in the right sorts of ways, then they're going to be free to show up to
Hmm.
do the work. So can you tell us a little bit, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, equitable conflict management. Part of the problem, I think, with conflict and having difficult conversations, however you want to talk about them, is that I imagine people approach conflict the way that I do, and they see the things that I see, which is just not true.
Yeah.
Right. And that causes more conflict. Why is this person running away from me? Why is this person pursuing me? Why is this person whatever? Can you maybe, when you maybe some advice for somebody about really thinking about equity
Hmm.
and how they either put a system in place when it comes to having difficult conversations with peers or management, or the managers having difficult conversations? How do you see these things working well together?
Yeah. I like to be more on the offensive because if it's reached a point where it's a conflict, then there's some things up front that haven't been happening. And what I mean by that is, a lot of managers, they have their staff meeting maybe once a month or once every other month or whatever, but they don't truly take the time to do the large percentage of their job. And the biggest percentage of their job is to manage and lead their team. And the best way to do that is by having one-on-ones with your team, so you understand what their skills are, what their capabilities, their strengths, their areas for development, their life experiences. What are some of the challenges and obstacles that are getting in their way of them being able to have an optimal level of performance, or that they feel is holding them back from their career aspirations? That's management 101. Meeting people where they are, having those discussions with them, those are acts of equity,
Mm.
because you know that everyone on your team didn't come from the same starting place. They didn't start at the same time. They don't have the same level of skills and capabilities. And so you need to make sure that you understand that, and you're having this conversation with them so they understand what it is that you understand what it is that's getting in the way. You're partnering with them to help them from a developmental standpoint, to help them from a growth standpoint, to help them from a career aspiration standpoint. When you do that, then when the conflict does inevitably happen, because conflict always does happen, you have a better understanding, because you know this person. You understand their all of those things that we talked about, and you can have a better conversation and dialogue with them in that conflict, especially if it's a conflict between two of your team members. You know them, you know kind of what their makeup is, and you can kind of help to bring two opposing views, mindsets together to make for a better team and group dynamic.
Mm.
And so that's what I like to say is the acts of equity are very, very important, because you understand it. And let's say one of the team members, they have to leave early. The other team member doesn't know why, but they have to leave early. You know that mother has a special needs child at home. They have to be home at a certain period of time, but the team members don't know that once she puts them to bed, she's back online, she's doing work, etc. And you know that because you've had the conversation with her.
Mhm.
So when that conflict happens between her and a peer, you can better work that conflict, because that person doesn't know her personal situation, but you do, because
Mhm.
you've had that conversation with her. You put those acts of equity in place for her to meet her personal needs of having a special needs child and the flexibility that's needed in her work. And so that's where having that work that's done ahead of time is really, really crucial in conflict management. And it really, really helps, especially everybody on your team is diverse. Diversity is simply differences in people, those you can see and those you can see. And so knowing that you have a team full of people who are different in
Mhm.
so many different perspectives and ways, you have to get them to this collective purpose. The collective purpose is what is the output that we have to have that day, or what do we have to have accomplished? What are our priorities? And to do that, everyone didn't start from the same place. So go and do your acts of equity, meet with them, blow those obstacles out of the way, help them to be better level professionals. And then that helps you to better manage the conflict that may arise.
I love that. Absolutely. I mean, it sounds simple, and yet we know it's not happening. And imagine, I mean, this is the case that somebody might be listening saying, I've never had a one-on-one. We don't do that. Then, I mean, then how do you really know your people? And this is the thing with management. Management and leadership is the people business, right? And if you are not interested in people, in the particularity of the individual in front of you, you've lost.
Yeah.
You're going to be hobbling along. And so the question is, well, what is it you really want to achieve? So if we know what we want to achieve, this certain kind of outcome, okay, then we're going to be working with people. What are people like? Oh, how do I want to be treated as an individual, right? And so
Mhm.
you have this collective, sort of this view of democracy that we're going to treat everybody the same. But the treating everybody the same could be that we're going to treat everybody as particulars. And so we're
Yeah.
going to look at what their particular needs are, and they change. Health conditions change, statuses change. We're constantly changing. And
Yeah.
if the team talks about diversity and you know, my hope is that where we currently are politically in the States, that this is a wake-up call so that my perspective has sort of been that DEI has become more of a click point every year. I click through this series because HR makes me click through the series and now I'm done with it. And
Or
instead of seeing
performative.
yeah, very performative, instead of seeing it as the jewel that it is, the gift that it is, that if everybody looks and thinks like me, that's a problem. I mean, I am fabulous, and so are you, but we don't need a bunch of me's, right? Because I'm doing my own thing, and you're doing your own thing. And if you and I work together on something, it's going to be so much better. And
Hmm.
that's your gifts and your particularity and your needs and mine. And so if I get to be a part of a team that is generous to you and I get that reciprocity, how much more, if we want engagement and belonging, gosh, I got to extend that grace and that whatever to somebody else, and I got to receive that.
Hmm.
And if we want to talk about loyalty, how do you get I mean, there's all these sorts of layers that you get if you actually pay attention to the particular people around you instead of people as a category status.
Yes, yes. It's just so very important. You get while you're doing those acts of equity, when you're meeting one on one, you're also at the same time building trust with that
Mm,
individual, and
yeah,
then building trust with your team, and it's just that is a powerful, powerful tool and resource for any manager or leader, because what you're going to get out of the employees is that discretionary effort,
mm,
and everyone wants to get that discretionary effort because they believe in you, they believe in you as a leader, as a manager, and they'll take that hill with you.
yeah, absolutely. Well, this book sounds fabulous, The Truth About Equity. So my last question for you is, as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that they'll be encouraged to thrive and flourish? I feel like we've just been talking about it, but this is my ending question. So what
Yeah,
else would you like
I
to say?
think that leaders need and managers need to understand that diversity, equity, especially, and inclusion, those are not performative. They shouldn't be performative. They need to be a fundamental skill set within your resources and your as a leader and as a manager, and also frankly as a business too, and understanding your customers.
Mhm.
So I think it's just really, really critical that they understand it, that the truth about equity is that it does create fair and equitable practices for everyone and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Celeste, thank you so much for this fabulous conversation.
Well, thank you for the dialogue. This has been really, really great, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this very, very important subject.
Absolutely. I encourage you all to go out and get her book, The Truth About Equity. Well, thank you so much. Take care.
All right, take care.
Celeste, thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation. And dear listener, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you know I spend usually a good 20, 15 minutes talking about the person that I'm interviewing and all about their career, which I would have loved to hear more about, but Celeste and I just got right into the meat of work environments, and I appreciate the work that she is doing. Equity obviously is so important because we all want to be treated equitably, and when we all feel like we are being treated justly at work, it's better for all of us. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, it's much appreciated. If you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, which is called Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset, it is available on Amazon. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.